Our minutes from our August 25th meeting.
I move to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Next, presentations. We'll have the 2026 fiscal year monthly financial update by Mr. John Troyer. Welcome and good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I want to just talk a little bit without too much of numbers. We had hurricane come by, or at least the threat of a hurricane this past week and this past weekend. And so we had a number of meetings in planning and preparation. And so that knowing that would happen, and it's good to just remind the public that the town has set aside a special disaster fund in to be kind of the first responder to a disaster. And so it's money set aside specifically for a disaster. June 30th, it was $37.5 million. At September 30th, it was $37.7 million. So it earned a little bit of interest in the first quarter. And as long as we don't need to tap into it, it can grow and be prepared for that hurricane when it does hit. And so that's always a comfort to know that that's there and that capacity is there to help in case of an emergency need. Also, on top of that is that town council has a policy to set aside 20% of debt capacity for a disaster or an emergency. And so that math turns out to be $21.3 million. And so town council also has a tool in its toolbox of $21.3 million capacity of debt to borrow in case the need arises. And so if a hurricane were to come, we needed funds, we have cash on hand, and we also have that borrowing capacity that's set aside by policy, and that math works out to be 21.3. And so you could combine those two and have an initial response of over $50 million, which would help, especially when it takes a number of months or more for FEMA reimbursements. We would hope to have FEMA reimbursements. When Hurricane Matthew came, our initial estimates were $86 million. So just for measurement's sake, it's like, okay, when we first thought Hurricane Matthew turned out to be less, the National Guard did some, the county did some was not done. And so our numbers turned out to be just under 60 million, but the initial response was expected to be 86. And so you can kind of keep those numbers in mind and say, well, we have capacity for a response. Of course, that was 2016. Prices are higher, but it does help with that very first initial response. Anyway, that's our disaster. A couple of things that we've got, a repeat of June 30th numbers that are in your packet. Our numbers have changed slightly. There were a few things, a few late invoices that were processed through and adjusted. And so generally what has happened is we had a few different invoices that were still being negotiated with the vendors, with contractors, and as those negotiations cleared up and the documentation was resolved, these were booked into, and so we've provided these to the auditors and updated our auditors as well. Small changes in fund balance, but we did have one that was kind of substantial for stormwater, and so it was the difference between stormwater have a addition to fund balance to a small reduction in fund balance. And so it turned out to be about $300,000. And so now with this additional invoice posted, the net for the stormwater is down $118,000. And so a little bit different than what you saw last month, but still within our expectations. And so we'll move on. Our auditors are working. We're working very closely with our auditors, and so they'll be here in the next 2 weeks, and they'll be on site. And so they work mostly remote, but 2 weeks from now they're going to be on site. And so that also means that they're moving forward and moving quickly. Their expectation is they're going to be finished on December 1st. We like that schedule and hope they stick to it, but it won't be long after that, and they'll come back, and the auditors will make a presentation to town council and say, okay, here's our financial report, here's our findings, and here's our comments or suggestions if they have any. And so you'll get that feedback from them soon. Couple of things. 2025, we're able to, and just in retrospect, we were able to fund all our operations. We were able to put back money into reserve, and we did reduce debt. And so last year on the schedule, we reduced debt by $13.8 million. This year on the schedule, we're reducing debt by $16 million, and that's $8 million plus $7 million on early beach payments. And so those transactions have processed, and so our beach debt that's specific to beach preservation fees has been redeemed, and so that transaction's happened. Our budget 2026 has started, and so we've had a few organizational changes, and so we're making sure that we've got everybody in the right place at the right spot, and that's a piece of what we do. A lot of contracts happen at the start of the year, start of every year, and so we're processing all of those. You'll see that in the numbers. Also, a couple of things to know about just the numbers that you look at for August is that it's the opposite effect. And so for June 30th, we do our accruals and go to a full accrual basis. And so we reach into July and pull back payroll. We reach into July and pull back revenue receipts. And so on the other side of June 30th for July 1, those transactions aren't there. We stay on a cash basis until next year end. And so it's going to look like our payroll is less than what you would expect because some of that was moved back to June 30th. It'll look like some of our revenues are less than what you would expect in the early part of the year. But just remember, at the end of the year, we pull in as with that conversion from cash to accrual, and then it comes back. A couple other things, and just from examples. Property tax, we're showing a 10% increase over the prior year. However, if you look at our percentage of budget, it's 0%. And so we can compare to last year and say, oh, we're doing great, it's 10% great, but we're still at 0% collected. And so it's so early in the year that the comparisons don't really do you much good. The bills don't go out for property taxes until October, and so our real collections start November, December, and so that's when you have more meaningful property tax collection numbers. Business license is down 85%. However, we're only 2% collected. It's still early, so most people are going to submit their business tax returns in the spring, and then that's when we have much more meaningful comparisons. Permits are up 98%, but only 35% of the budget. And so, okay, we don't get too excited about good news either, just because we have some seasonality with permits. Permits are generally very bumpy in the numbers, and so we can be way up one month and way down the next month. And so, okay, we take that with a grain of salt. A tax is 36% above prior year, but only 8% of budget. Still way, way early, and so we're not jumping to too many conclusions on that. However, to say that this is the first financial report, we can say that this is where we would expect to be. Our numbers continue to be good and strong for June 30th last year, and I certainly would open it up to any comments or questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Troy. Any comments or questions? Ms. Bryson?
Can we back up to your opening statement? Thank you for reporting about our disaster fund, or I'm not going to say rainy day fund, but the emergency fund.
Yeah, it's an
Reporting about
emergency fund, and it's
Yeah.
called a natural disaster fund, yes.
Thank you. Are we still waiting on some money from FEMA for the prior storm for which we requested funding?
We are, yes, and so that's normal. We continue to work closely with the SCEMD. They usually ask for things 2 or 3 times, and as it goes up the chain, and so we just provide what they ask, and
And how much is that, and how long have we been waiting?
I don't have any numbers right in front of me, but we just know that we are diligent, and we've got a couple of people who are very, very good to follow up and provide documentation and make sure that we're not missing anything. And so, and I can also report that we have had good reports back from FEMA on some beach renourishment, and so our expectations have been affirmed and recommitted from FEMA that we're going to see some payments for our beach renourishment project, which is really, really good news, because some of that was related to Hurricane Matthew and I think Hurricane Irma and the damage that was done then. And we said, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to do beach renourishment until some years ahead. Let us make a claim for that, and they are. And so that's good news for the town.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it on our end, but I think, Mr. Chair, it would be nice to have a short report on where things stand with FEMA.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that, and we can give some more detail, provide some more detail on that, yes.
And then to our current question, and that is the financials for the year FY '25. Can you give me a bottom line? How much money are we looking at carrying forward from FY '25 to FY '26?
I think the simple answer is for the general fund, and that's generally the operating budget for the town, the general fund, put back $12 million from where we started. Of that was included in that $12 million was the one-time settlement from Airbnb. And so we can certainly celebrate that and say that, okay, we received more than what was spent, and town council gives town council opportunity to have that available for future decisions.
And taking out that one-time settlement, how much would be carried forward?
It would be about $7 million.
All right. And then I had some questions about the report on the capital fund.
Okay, great.
FY '25. Can you tell me, can we put that up on the screen so we can look at the numbers together? Financials, and we scroll down. I have a note that, I think it's page 18 of the screen documents, but somewhere thereabout. Yep. Perfect. So just looking at that, so I'm looking at, I guess this is the kind of the summary page.
Right,
Am I on the
yes.
right summary page? Okay. So I'm looking at revenues, then I'm looking at total expenditures, and it looks like that we have almost $6 million that was not spent, but then I'm looking at beach maintenance, 19 million. Is that for beach renourishment?
Yeah, the biggest, by far the biggest one is the beach renourishment project, which it moves into 2026. And that does bring me up to another point that I wanted to make, is that of the 2026 budget that town council has passed, is that we are planning to present an amendment to that. And the amendment is really to update, because as the CIP was created, as it was created and adopted, thought through, our part of that CIP budget was, here's our expectation for how much we have left at June 30th. And now that we have June 30 numbers, there's going to be adjustments to that. And so we would go forward to town council and say, well, our expectations were different than how the final numbers came out. And then we would seek town council's permission to restore those funds into the new year. And so our expectation is to bring that forward in November.
I think it'd be helpful, pardon me, helpful to know, taking out the 19 million of 44.6, I'll just call it that way. So would that leave you at about 25 million that we did not spend? It's, if I've done the math right, Ms. Tunner. But what I'm curious about is that of those capital projects, there are a lot that were not done, but anticipated to be budgeted for in FY '25. I think it might be good for us to take a look at that. I know that FY '26 for our capital projects, we've shown them phased in every year, so it wouldn't all be spent in 1 year. But the reality is the time it takes to design and then the permitting and then finally getting to construction. So I'm curious about what projects were affected and why the money wasn't spent in FY25. I mean, I'm all about it's good to keep money and save it, but if we had projects that we thought were going to happen, I'm just curious about what happened with those. I know you wouldn't report on the actual work, but on the financial part of it, if there was any problems with that related to financing. But I think it'd be good to know, for future planning purposes.
Absolutely, and it's something that we talk about internally quite a bit, is what does it take to execute those capital projects, and it underscores on the financial statements, okay, we can have a favorable budget variance, but the favorable means that the work wasn't done, and so that's not really a favorable budget variance. And I know that the CIP group, and maybe that's where we can go next month, is to get a report from our friends at the CIP, and they can talk a little bit about the projects and the pacing of those projects. And I know some of the budget was, if everything works well, and then there's obvious, problems with the permitting, problems with the design, and there's a lot of different places that it can, the project schedule can slide. And so we have experienced that, and just know that our orders from our leader, Mark, get those projects done. And so that's certainly high priority among our CIP group. And so financially, I don't know that there's anything to report, but these are the bills that have been paid for the work that's been done.
I think I'd also be curious to know if any of these funds in effect were planned to be carried forward for FY26. So of the FY26 numbers, are we showing any of these that were planned to be carried forward by the time the budget was adopted?
We are, and so I don't have numbers in front of me, but of this available budget, the 44 million, our expectation for a budget amendment is only $6 million. And so it's substantially less because we were counting on most of that to happen, and they kind of knew at budget season, most of this is going to push into fiscal 26, and so it was planned for. However, it's about $6 million more than what we thought. And so that presentation would be a request to raise the budget in fiscal 26 for money that was not spent in 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let me just get this out, Ms. Turner, before I lose it. So I agree with Ms. Bryson that, the more that we can continue to understand the financials, particularly year over year. I know we've had discussion about potentially having maybe a 5-year CIP plan so that the picture looks a little different. But yes, Ms. Bryce's math was close with, about 26 million after you take the 19 for the beach renourishment, but you also have to take in consideration the commitments, which is another 13 million.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot more burn in the CIP than what's being displayed, particularly when you make the comment about only 6 million in a budget amendment. So it's very confusing, but I think the more we talk through it, the better off we'll be as far as trying to explain it to the public as far as how these funds roll over year after year. I think that's where some of the angst may be.
Exactly, we understand, and we all want these projects to move forward, and whatever we can do to move the barriers out from in front of them is good. And so there's a lot of work that happens in the planning part of these projects, and the bidding part of these projects, and the design part of these projects. And so the payment side is just a small piece at the end.
Yes. So thank you for the conversation regarding the CIP. So as you move forward with budget adjustments, does that come to the Finance Committee first?
I think it does. I think we've had it both ways, and
I would recommend that it comes to the Finance Committee first so we can ask these questions and have a good understanding of how it was calculated. And it was a great question regarding the fact that we still have $45 million in available budget in capital, and to hear that that amount is not being carried forward, but it's something much smaller because the budgeting process tried to take into account the fact that monies were not going to be spent in fiscal year 25 and did their best to estimate how much that would be in fiscal year 26.
We asked the CIP group to put together their budget proposals in January, and so they're projecting in January how far a CIP project would be at June 30th, all the way through the spend out, and yes, and so and you'll see all the detail that goes with it as we discuss a proposed budget amendment. But yeah, you'll see exactly which projects and how much for each project. It was expected to be, here's how much it actually was. And so yes, collectively, there's more money to carry forward for this.
Also, I just want to comment, the package is quite large, but it was laid out in a way that it was easy to understand. It really helped to peel back the onion, starting with the summary and then getting more into the details so you could connect the dots of what was happening. I did want to talk to you about a process-related question. And if we could go back to page 4, which shows the summary of the general fund for 2025. Okay, yeah. And my process-related question has to do with the transfers in. So when I look at transfers in across the various fund balances, it looks like the general fund is the only one that takes the budgeted amount and puts it into the actual. And so when you look at the business results for 2025, without budget adjustments, we brought in $56 million. We spent almost $58,000 and had a negative of 1.6 million. And then we have transfers in of 14 million. And that gives us a positive addition to our fund balance of almost 13 million. So my question is, given that position, is there an opportunity for some process improvement regarding transfers in?
Agreed, yes.
Okay, all right, because
Yes.
it seems like we have overly, I want to say accrued, but that's not the right word, overly transferred in funds. And I don't know exactly where those funds came from, which accounts those came from, but now that 14 million is in our general fund and can only be used for certain things within that general fund. So I'm glad to hear you say that you think there's an opportunity for process improvement. I would define that as we would have transferred in less money because we needed less money, and leave that money in those reserves in those other funds so that we would have the ability to use those in perhaps more ways than we could leaving it in general.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good discussion to have. And I think springtime is the time to have that, and then say, okay, as we go into year end, just in the timing where I'm here is like, okay, all of it was transferred in, and so it already happened. And so I think that's worth a conversation, is like, okay, as we see that Airbnb settlement has happened, we're going to be to the good. Maybe we don't take those transfers. And I 100% agree with you.
All right, okay, well, thank you. Other than that, I did want to make a comment regarding our special revenue funds and the results, which are on page 31. And I know it's only 2 months in, but I did want to say that although only 2 months in, the numbers are small, but it is nice to see that our real estate transfer fees are up 36%, our hospitality tax is up 7%, and our beach reservation fee is up 36%. And I realize these are small numbers, but it was good to see that it's a positive trend.
Yes, absolutely. I'm I see the real estate transfer fee and I'm like, wow, that was really good. Yes.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Troyer. I have two little circles on my sheet. Many of the revenue sources show an increase, for 2025, more than we expected in some cases. However, the hospitality tax and short-term rental fees were down, okay? And I know you spoke on the H-tax, last meeting. Sort of take us through those two as far as some of the reasons that they're down.
And it's speculation. And so just know that just seeing those numbers, it seemed as if our accommodations numbers were strong and gained, and our hospitality, which is based on prepared food and drink, were slightly down. And so it seemed to me that from a overall perspective is that, okay, people are still coming to the island. They're still paying Hilton Head Island rates. However, they're not eating out as much. It could be an explanation. Maybe they're eating in more. And so I think that's a very real possibility, but I think it's also worthy of, I think from a revenue collections, and that's a piece of the finance department is revenue collections. And I think seeing those H-tax numbers is going to require more attention to say, okay, let's take a look at our taxpayers and, do we need more attention in those areas on the collecting side?
And as far as the short-term rental permit fee, I think was the other one that went down a little bit. Is there a reason behind that?
I struggle with the reason why. I think it just is, and I think it'll be interesting to see. Maybe there's people who are in the business and decided not to renew. Maybe there's people who waited to renew until later in the year. Maybe. I think there's going to be a lot of anecdotes, and I think we can bring some of those back. But I'm curious about that going forward. And so from an economic standpoint, okay, they rent it out. Maybe it's they're not making the profit they hoped. And so maybe they don't rent it out.
Before we let Mr. Troyer go, I'm just going to make this sort of plug to my colleagues here. I know we're having a discussion on next week around short-term rental regulations, and part of that discussion may involve the permit fees, where we have a current fee that's escalated based on the amount of bedrooms. And I know we're gonna have some discussions around the topic. So I'm intentional with making the comment and the question around the short-term rental permit fee showing some decline, okay? And obviously, Mr. Troy doesn't have the exact answer, nor do I expect him to have it, but I think it's something we need to pay attention to as we're trying to back into numbers that would be new short-term rental fees to cover things that would help us with the regulations, such as more employees at the permit desk, more employees in the business license collection, folks to help Mr. Bromage out with calls, that sort of thing. And obviously, we need to find the funding to do so, but I'm not quite sure that we want to overreach in that area, being that we're seeing some decline at the moment. That's the comment that I wanted to make amongst us on the finance committee.
Right, and from our perspective, we like to make sure that people are signed up and do have the permit so that we can collect the business license fees and we can collect accommodations tax. And so there's a value to the town in the permit fee collections, yes, great. And then there's the value that ongoing accommodations tax collections is connected to that.
Absolutely. Okay. Ms. Bryson, yes.
One couple of follow-up comments. Good point, Mr. Brown, about that. I think it might be helpful for us to know, just on a math basis, if the number of permits decreased, and that resulted in the lower number, because I think there might have been, pardon me, a decrease in the number of permits. So if we could have that data, I think that would be helpful before.
Yeah, it's straight math. The amount that it's down is
Good, I'm
the
glad
number
you're
of
on straight
permits.
math. Yeah. And the other thing I noted is although there's some decrease in hospitality tax and short-term rental, the state A tax was up as well as the local A tax, and also the beach preservation fee. So there was still some rental activity going on. It's just perhaps in the number of permits, but we need to be mindful of that as well. So maybe we can get a little more data about that.
We're changing the mix of what's being rented out there. And so I think, yes, it certainly would point towards is that we need further study on this. It's like, okay, things are changing and you're seeing that.
Well, one of the things we may want to think about as well as we analyze that is that we don't rent 100% of our short-term rentals. And so there is naturally an excess capacity out there. So one of the things that, could be thought of is that perhaps we're reducing some excess capacity that's just sitting there and not being utilized.
Right, and those numbers are published. I think the chamber publishes, percent of capacities rented, and and that it's seasonal. And so yes, you're exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Troya. I want to welcome Mr. Alfred to the conversation as well. Good morning, sir. Feel free as we move along to comment along with us. All right, we will move into our new business, consideration of the ordinance of the town of Hilton Head Island to amend Municipal Code Title 10, Section 10-1-250, the business license ordinance to update the business license class schedule as required by Act 176 of 2020 for the town of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, and providing for severability and effective date. Ms. Atkins, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How are you? I'm glad to be back. I'm April Atkins. I am currently serving as the town's interim revenue manager on our finance team. So I'm here today to talk to you about our business license ordinance update. Really exciting stuff. I am going to get my glasses on though, excuse me. Okay, so I thought I would provide a brief history on the why we're here today to update our business license ordinance. Back in September of 2020, the South Carolina General Assembly did pass Act 176, which was also known as the Business License Standardization Act. And that law did require every local government that levied a business license tax to administer the tax in the same way. And that was effective January 1 of 2022. And as a result, our Municipal Association of South Carolina created a business license model ordinance to help ensure compliance with all of the requirements and regulations in the new law. And afterwards, our town council at the time, in September of 2021, adopted that business license model ordinance, and we are now currently operating and administering our business license taxes according to the law. So let's talk a little bit about the business license class schedules. Act 176 did require all jurisdictions with business licenses to use a standard class schedule to help categorize the businesses accurately. And that standardized class schedule helps promote clarity. So our businesses understand their licensing requirements based on their business activity. In addition, Act 176 also established an ongoing process for the town. So we have to, we must maintain our ordinance to keep the business license practices compliant with the state law. And then I thought it was important to note that while the business license class schedules are determined at the state level, our town business license rate schedule, which is our tax rates, is determined at the local level by town council. Act 176 does require the town to adopt through an ordinance the latest standardized business license class schedule. That is recommended through MASC, and it goes through an approval process by the South Carolina Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office. That does happen every odd year, so you'll get to see me in 2027. MASC determines that class schedule and revises the standardized business class schedule every even year. They use a 3-year average of the latest available nationwide IRS profitability statistics. And you should note the 2025 class schedule is based on the federal tax years from 2019 to 2021. The intent and goal of this process was to help stabilize and limit our large fluctuations in our business classes and our tax revenue. We've gone through this process twice now. Originally in 2021, when Act 176 came on board. So the town completed a business license revenue analysis then based on the required changes and reclassifications, and that did cause a shortfall to the town of $339,892. And at that time, town council did vote and approve to increase our business license tax rates by 7.2% to offset the shortfall and achieve a neutral result, which was required by law then. And then again, in 2023, we completed a license revenue analysis based on the required changes and reclassifications and found that we had a very small shortfall of about $33,000, which is about 1%, or less than 1% of our town business license tax revenue. So at the time, the town council decided to maintain its current tax rates, and there were no adjustments made at the time. So now in our current year, we did, as required, go through a very detailed revenue analysis. We went through approximately 4,000 business license accounts, and this did happen back in July, to determine the impact of the class changes and reclassifications to the town and, of course, to our business community. You should note there are 30 industry sectors in the class schedules. Of the 35 industries will be impacted by the schedule changes for the 2026 business license tax year. 4 of those industries, or about 71% of our town's businesses, will have a tax rate reduction due to the reclassifications, and then we've got 1 industry, or about 1% of our businesses, will have a tax rate increase. And by applying those new class schedules and reclassifying the businesses, the total business license tax revenue shortfall to the town is $348,745. This is an overview of our detailed business license revenue analysis. It is based on the fiscal year 25 tax income that was collected and the income that was reported. And I kind of wanted to go through this a little bit in detail so you can understand who's impacted and why. There are, as you can see on the left-hand side, there are 9 classes within the schedule. The impacts are happening in classes 1 through 7, so I did highlight that in the green. And if we want to, I'm just going to go through those for you. So in the first one is our mining industry, and as you can imagine, we don't have businesses here mining, so that particular reclassification did not impact us, but they did go from a class 2 to a class 3. And then our next industry that's impacted is our transportation and warehousing. And to give you an idea of who's in there, we've got our vehicle for hire, so taxi, limousine, shuttle services, our fishing and sailing charters, our dolphin tours. We've got towing services, our tow trucks, couriers, moving trucks, people like that. And those businesses fall into this category. And currently they are in class 1 and they will be moved to a class 2. And with that change, the town will see a little bit of a revenue increase of about $13,000. Our next industry is honestly our largest impact. A majority of our businesses fall into this industry, and that is the real estate, rental, and leasing industry. There's actually a lot of other businesses in here than just our short-term rentals. So I wanted to point that out. We've got all of our rentals, long-term rentals, commercial real estate property rentals. We've got management companies that manage all of those rentals, plus HOAs, regimes, that sort of thing. We've got real estate offices. We have equipment rentals. So think of event rentals, bike rentals, We've got beach equipment rentals, appraisal companies, car rentals, timeshares fall in here as well. So a big part of our business, book of business is done in this particular industry. They are currently in a Class 7, and they will be reclassified to a Class 6. And when that occurs, we are seeing a revenue shortfall for the town that's over $253,000. The next industry is our professional, scientific, and technical services. To give you an idea of who's in there, we have photographers, accounting services, CPAs. Let's see, we've got surveying, engineering groups, attorneys, architects, consultants, marketing and design. Those types of businesses are in this particular industry. And in this case, they are being changed or reclassified from a Class 5 over to a Class 6. Oh, did I read that wrong? I think you're right, yeah. Sorry, 4. Oh my goodness. I am so sorry. Old lady eyes. Okay, sorry, they're going from a Class 5 to a Class 4. And in that instance, we will see a revenue loss of about $30,000 to the town in our 2026 business license year. And then we also have another industry that's being impacted. That is our healthcare and social assistance. And that is going to have the businesses that you would expect, our physicians and doctors' offices. We also have dentists, chiropractors. We've got assisted living facilities, our nursing home facilities, our healthcare workers that assist, our caregivers and dentists, things of that nature fall into this category. So they are going from a Class 4 into a Class 3. And again, we will see a revenue loss of close to $46,000. And then last but not least, we have an industry that's called other services. And that has a lot of repair services. So think of car repairs, appliance repairs. We've got hair salons and barber shops. Our HOAs actually fall into this category. We've got a wedding and event planners. Let's see, we've got nail salons, pet services like groomers, massage and spa services. So that's another big industry, wide selection of businesses. We are in that particular industry moving from a Class 4 down to a Class 3. And again, we'll see revenue loss of a little over $32,000. When you look at the bottom line there, that is when you go through the fiscal year actual business licenses collected, that revenue is a little over $7.4 million. And that is just based on the close to 14,000 accounts that we were looking at. That's based on the income that they reported. And then when we reclassify and look at what we would collect if the rates change and the classifications occur, we are looking, of course, at the shortfall of $348,745. After going through the revenue analysis, finance staff has recommendations for the committee today. So, of course, we are asking to adopt the standardized business license class schedule as required by Act 176. We are recommending to rebalance the town's business license tax rates to ensure a revenue neutral result. That would require us to increase our tax rates across all class rates of 4.9%. And then we're also requesting that the committee recommend to town council to amend the current business license and adopt the business license class schedule as required by law. And lastly, I just wanted to provide a timeline of events. We are in a tight timeline to implement this. So today, of course, I'm in front of you discussing the upcoming changes. We do have this on the calendar, on the agenda for October 21st for first reading. And it's also scheduled for the second and final reading on November 4th. And then behind the scenes, we will start working to make sure we are updating our business license software with our vendors and preparing for our 2026 business license tax year. In December, it takes the entire month to work through this process in the system, print the renewals, get them ready to mail, et cetera. And then in January, typically we do mail out the renewals. And of course, that would be implementing the new business license class schedules and notifying the businesses of any changes. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Turner?
All right. If we could go back to the slide that shows the impacts by the various segments.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. Yeah.
So thank you for the analysis. This was very helpful. And as you mentioned, if we apply exactly what the state provides, we would have a deficit of $349,000 in our business licenses. And as we look at that, the town's recommendation is to increase everyone's rates 4.9% to offset that deficit. When I look at it, it's very clear, from your analysis that there's one category that's driving the majority of that decrease, which is the change for real estate and rental and leasing from Class 7 to Class 6. And so that's $253,000. So the majority of the change. So as I was thinking about this, I was thinking that perhaps we might want to consider changing the rates for that group only, and then keeping all the recommended rates for all of the other classes in the state. And by doing that, we could reduce that deficit from 349,000 to about 95,000, or a little over 1% of our licenses. And in this way, we're not, quote unquote, adversely impacting the other businesses to make up for that deficit. So I think you could accomplish that by simply taking the rates for the new Class 6 and applying them at the level of the old Class 7, not the new recommended, but the old Class 7. And doing that would provide you to make up a large percentage of the deficit and only affect that class and not affect all the other classes. I know that we do have the ability to set our own rates here in the town, so this is, something that we can consider. So I'd love to hear from my fellow town council members, any thoughts about that process?
May I address that?
Yes.
I did look into that. That was the thought as you look at our revenue analysis. I checked with MASC to see what they would recommend and advise. They did say if we have a shortfall that we should make adjustments to our rates, but it needs to be across all of classes, that we cannot pick and choose a class. So that was their recommendation, and we could certainly follow up with Curtis to get a legal opinion on that if you would like. But I did look into that.
Thank you for looking into that. It did not make that clear in the regulations as you read them.
I think that's an opinion outside
So
of
that's
the
an opinion.
law.
Okay,
Yeah.
but thank you for that.
Sure, yeah.
Ms. Bryson?
I too had the same kind of analysis going like, why don't we, instead of doing it across the board and affecting everyone. So it sounds as though that's what MASC is recommending. It's not what is required, although we would have to lean on our town attorney as you suggest. But
Correct.
Previously, when there was the 7.2% increase in 2021, was that across the board at
Yes,
the time,
ma'am.
do you recall?
Yes.
I don't know whether you were around and knew about that. So. But I would like, I agree with Ms. Tunner. I think we ought to take a close look at that and see if that's a possible way to go. And I don't want to hold up the process and getting it on before the full town council, but maybe we could think about doing something subject to the town attorney's opinion, that we can do it that way. Because I think that is a fair way to do it. And thank you. I had a question about who's in those categories, so thanks for.
It's not
reading out
always
that
obvious.
list. It's really helpful. And what was my other question about this, across the board? The other thing is that because it's going to change, whatever the number is, the revenue is going to change. And so do we need to also, in addition to adopting this ordinance, which I'm fully in favor of doing this, we have to do it anyway. It's interesting to me, I've seen this happen in North Carolina, where every now and again, the General Assembly says, let's change these classifications, because evidently somebody was complaining to them about how much they were paying. So at any rate, I'm wondering if we also need a budget ordinance amendment, or to include it in a larger budget ordinance amendment, because it is going to be changing our revenue stream for certain categories. And I see Mr. Troyer standing at this moment to help address that, but that was my other question.
We can incorporate that, and so we do plan a budget amendment in November, and so whatever town council would decide this month, we can incorporate that.
Right. And one final question, I'm looking at the schedule, and so are business licenses renewed on a calendar year basis?
So the business license year runs from May 1 to April 30th.
Okay.
Typically, we open up the renewal period in January to start the collection of the next upcoming year taxes.
But in this case, we would be doing that as of January 1, the renewals.
Yes, that's correct.
And so is that a change we make locally? Is that going to be an every year change? Or is there a state statutory requirement as to when these renewals happen?
That's the same process we do every year. So again, our current business licenses expire on April 30th, but people elect to renew prior to April 30th. So that's a normal process for us.
And the reason I'm asking about this is because I understand there's consideration of lining up short-term rental permits with the business licenses. And that's why I'm asking the question is, how are we going to do that? This seems to be renewing January 1, which is the same day STR permits would renew. But it sounds as though, does someone then have to turn around and renew their business license again by May 1st?
I know that's confusing. So the STR permit, we open the portal up November 1st and start renewing for the upcoming year. At that time, they have a current business license, so we issue their permit based on that. After April 30th, if they haven't renewed their business license or their permit, then we have to follow up with those accounts for delinquency. So there is a weird lag because of the different due dates. We get a lot of complaints about that from our taxpayers. So lining up the due dates really would be a business-friendly approach.
Yeah, and now I'm looking at the timeline for the business licenses, since we're going to need to change this by the end of this calendar year.
Right.
Then that means that there's going to be another renewal process. So will businesses have to renew twice, basically?
No. So their license stays current, nothing changes on their current year license. Once they do renew, they're paying for the next year's license, whether it's January 1st or April 30th. So the new class schedule change needs to be in place when we open up the portal for renewals. Is that making sense?
Yeah, the only thing that's still confusing to me is I'm looking at your timeline of events, which is on a different screen, maybe another couple of
Yes.
screens after that. Timeline of events. Yeah, there we go. So it says December 2025 process 2026 business license renewals and prepare to mail renewals, and then they'll get the new class schedule is effective as of January 2026. So that was my confusing thing, is that the renewals are going out in December.
We don't mail them in December, we prepare them. So there's over 14,000 accounts, and it takes a lot of time to process it in the system itself.
Okay.
And then once we get it processed, we start printing and stuffing them in envelopes and getting them ready to send them out.
Okay, so-
And that does take most of December.
That December is processing and preparing to mail for renewal.
Yes.
For May 1.
Mostly
next year.
housekeeping stuff, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Now you see why I was asking. the
It
question.
is very confusing, I do understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good? Okay, Ms. Akins, can you go back to the revenue analysis screen, please? Trying to make sure that I'm reading and understanding this correctly. So the column that says current class rate, and we're saying that these are classes 1 through 7 on the top that are being affected, correct?
Yes,
So am I safely assuming and reading that we currently do not have anything in class 6 besides, well, I don't think there's anything in class 6, is that correct?
right, that's correct.
Okay, and the state is saying that we need to move some of class 7 to class 6 to include the real estate, correct?
Yes.
And so there are no other movements, but there are some, I guess, businesses that are currently in class 7 that are not moving.
Yes,
Is
that is correct, yes.
Okay, all right. So in essence, to Ms. Tunner's point, the only businesses that are going to be affected are the ones that are moving from class 7 to class 6 around real estate and rental, because now we make a new class, so to speak. So I did not straight math, I did some rough math. And it seems to me that since the class 7 is currently paying, I don't know, $92.50 to start, okay? And you compare that against the $84.80, I guess it is, that that will be paying if we make this move. $89, right? The differential in there is like 5 points, 5%, okay? And if you go back and just say that we were not going to give them a break, and they paid the original $84.80 that's in class 6, they're really getting a break. So I'm just wondering, and I appreciate the municipal association giving us a recommendation, but this is our business,
It's
okay?
substantial.
These are our folks that are being affected, okay? And I too do not want to hold up the process, but if it's as easy as adjusting that rate to cover the difference, and we not have an effect on the rest of the businesses, to me, it just makes business sense to take a look at that and try to do it, okay? So I wanted to make that comment along the way. We'll pause on this discussion so we can hear from our fellow colleague and also anybody else from the public, and then we'll circle back with you, Ms. Akins, okay? Mr. Alfred, I'll start with you. Are you good? No comments? Okay, all right. Anyone else from the public signed up? But Mr. Williams? No comments. Okay, anyone else? Okay, so my question, I don't know if Ms. Troy can help us with this as well, but I guess what I'm asking is, if we touch base with Mr. Coltrane, and he gives us a legal opinion that we can adjust individual rates, and based on the material that's before us, there's nothing telling us that we can't. What I read was the state is leaving it up to the municipality to change their rates, okay? There's nothing that says that it has to be. I'm just putting scenarios out here. If we decided tomorrow that we want to take a look at any of our rates, could we do that? I think the answer is yes. Okay, so I'm pushing back a little bit on the recommendation from the municipal association, okay? So if we can get that opinion to support what this committee is, what I'm assuming going to recommend here today, and then I would like that to go to full town council. If Mr. Coltrane comes back and says, I read it differently, you have to do what they're suggesting, then we go along with staff's recommendation. I think is probably the consensus of this committee.
Submit the question to the town attorney and see how he responds.
Okay.
And I'd like to just follow up. So the class 6 tax rate, we would just change to what they currently have now, and that's what we are wanting to ask, right? I think that's,
That was my recommendation,
I
and in
think
that
that's- yeah.
way, that class doesn't see any
Right.
change in their tax rates, so it's revenue neutral for them,
yes.
but it benefits the town, yes.
Run that past me one more time to make sure I'm clear. So
So, yes,
class 6 would be what?
so class 6 would go back to what the original class 7 is, so it would be $92.50
Got it.
for the base rate and $1.70 per $1,000.
Got it.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
Okay.
That would get us close to
Yes,
even?
yes.
Okay.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair, do we need a motion?
Yes.
And so I would think, yeah, it would be a recommendation to town council, subject to town attorney's opinion, to do just as what was proposed.
And let's be clear, what we don't want to have happen in this motion is that if the town attorney gives us a different opinion based on where we want to go, that we're not coming back to this committee. We're just going to take the staff recommendation to full council.
Okay, thank
Fair
you.
enough?
Yes.
You ready?
I'll
Ms.
give it a
Person?
try.
Okay.
You ready, Madam Deputy Clerk? I'll try to be simple. I move that we recommend to the full council adoption of the new class schedule for business licenses, and that the rate be revised, go back to the rate currently charged for Class 6, subject to approval of the town attorney. And if the town attorney determines we cannot change that rate, then the recommendation be to adopt the staff's recommendation of a 4.9% increase in the rate across the board. I see Ms. Akins nodding. I think I did okay.
I followed it. It was,
Well,
yeah.
I think there was one clarification. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Ms.
the one
Tucker.
clarification regarding the rate 6 piece. It should be the rate 6 should go back to the
Current rate.
current rate 7.
$92.50, to be exact.
Yeah,
Plus-
92.50 plus $1.70.
Thank you.
Yes,
Does that mean you second? I agree with that change. You
I
second.
second.
Okay. Any further discussion? We're good? We're clear? Staff side, we're clear? Miss, perfect. All in favor? All right, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Akins and Mr. Troyer. Job well done.
Thank you.
We will move on. Next item, consideration of an ordinance providing the issuance and sale of the town of Hilton Head Island special obligation bonds dealing with beach preservation fee pledge in one or more series in the principal amount not exceeding $19 million. Delegating the authority to the town manager to determine certain matters with respect to the bonds, prescribing the form and details of such bonds, other matters relating thereto, and providing for severability and effective date. Mr. Troyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, what the proposal is in front of you is to provide an opportunity to do what we talked about at the workshop. As you know, our beach renovation project is about $50 million. The proposal is to fund that with borrowed proceeds of up to $19 million to be sold competitively. It'd be fixed rate over 7 years, so not to exceed 7 years, which would be less than the expectation for the beach renovation project to last. And so our expectation is there would be another one. Hopefully it's not 7 years, hopefully it's more like 9 or 10, but we would amortize the debt over 7 just to make sure that we're on the good side of the next beach renourishment. It would prepare us for the beach renourishment. One of the benefits of this proposal is that it puts town council in a position, better position to respond in case there's other needs within the next 7 years to be able to do more beach renourishments if they're needed. And if not, then that's just save money because the beach preservation fee is applied and set aside in a separate fund to do the beach renourishment projects. And so this debt would be supported by a pledge of those future beach preservation fees. And so our proposal schedule is slightly different. We had an earlier schedule, and so our proposal would be to have first reading at town council October 21st, and then into November for the second reading. And then this we would issue requests for proposals from a number of different financial institutions, so they would have competitive rates. Our expectation is we should get this for under 4%, fixed rate. And so we would certainly suggest that. I think this puts town council in a better position to prepare for the future.
Okay,
One other thing is that we do have bond counsel and financial advisors here in case you have any questions, but our financial advisors are helpfully, their role is to help present this to as many buyers, potential buyers as possible to generate that competitiveness to get the best price. Bond counsel is here to make sure that we are legally supported in all our actions. And so they're here as resources in case you have any questions.
okay, thank you, Mr. Troyer. Ms. Brayson, we'll start with you.
Yes, sir. The staff report indicates the total project is expected to cost approximately $50 million. I know there was a $47.5 million. So my question is, does this include, I know we now have the bids in for phase 3. Does this include the work for phase 3 of the beach renourishment project?
It does, and there's a piece of the contracts that are variable depending on how much sand is needed. And so there was an engineering plan for a certain amount of sand, and when they find out that it might be slightly different, then that's measured and it can raise the price somewhat.
And so the borrowing would be 19 million of the 50 million, which in my straight math came out about 38% borrow and 62% cash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's nodding his head. I guess I did okay with my math. Okay, and I so what if the actual work exceeds that estimated 50 million? Do we have other cash to throw in?
There's some fund balance there in beach preservation fee fund balance, and our expectation and hope it's not going to be too big. And so they're doing that work as we speak, and so we're monitoring that every day.
Okay. And that would still keep in place our minimum reserve of 20 million in that fund.
And so essentially, you're not spending down the beach preservation fee fund balance down to zero, is that we borrow, and then that helps to maintain that minimum fund balance, and town council then is in a position to respond if need be.
And the other question I have, and I don't want to hold this up, I want to proceed with this, is that during some of the budget workshops, we had a chart. I have not been able to find the chart. I know it's in there somewhere. And that showed that, and this is a 7-year term, so this chart showed that here's the fund balance now, and here's the amount of dollars we're going to pay on debt service. I know it's the first year is interest only, but what we'd be paying on debt service for the 7-year term. So you would have the fund balance less the beach. You would add the beach preservation fee. So each year you'd have a fund balance, and you would add the fees collected for that year, and then you would subtract the debt service. And then you would subtract the minimum fund balance reserve of 20 million, and that would give you a new fund balance for the next year. And the reason I'm asking about this is because the idea is that we would keep all those going along during the 7-year time period, and when we get to the end of that time period, we have in place our $20 million reserve policy that's required, plus some more money to go towards the next beach renourishment project.
Yes, and so what we're trying to position ourselves so that whether it's cash, that would be best case scenario, or maybe we would reduce the 19 million next time out to a smaller amount, and so we're paying a higher percentage in cash the next time out. And so part of that is a function of when is the next beach renourishment. And so we assume it's 7 years, but we hope that it's 8 or 10.
And I did find that calculation from the Town Council Budget Workshop on May 12th of this year, taking the FY25 estimated fund balance of a little over 53 million, and then for FY26, taking out, in this case, we were also paying off the balance of the 2017 bonds, less cash-funded projects, and that included beach renourishment, I think. and then adding the beach preservation fee, and then subtracting other capital expenditures from that to get a revised estimated FY '26 fund balance of a little over 26 million, which exceeded our 20 million reserve. That's what we're forecasting for FY '26. So I don't want you to come back to this committee with that kind of chart, but I think for the town council consideration, it would be good to see that chart carried out through the term of this borrowing to show that we're trying to do what we say we're trying to do, if that makes sense.
And you're exactly right, and that's our position, is that it puts town council in a position 7 years from now to be able to do another project just like this, and then in between, have enough money to make your debt payments and have enough money to maintain that minimum fund balance.
Right.
Yes.
And then also to fund some other capital projects that we do, because the beach preservation fee is allocated not only for beach renourishment, but also for improvements to our infrastructure, the mogi mats that we put out, some other capital funds. So it would allow some expenditures within that as well, perhaps a placeholder of an average of what's been spent, or maybe what we put into the FY '26 budget, but some number there to indicate that we need to account for those capital expenditures during the term as well.
Yeah, because our full expectation is that there's gonna be needs, replacement of the mats and things like that at the beach, and there's those efforts will continue, yes.
And I did make some copies of what I'm talking about for my colleagues, because I know I was talking about a lot of stuff out in the air there, but one for each of you guys. And Mr. Troyer, if you want this one, this is from the May workshop. So you see what I'm talking about? It's up in this upper right-hand corner. But to carry that out and do a chart, something like that for the 7-year term of the borrowing, so we can see where we hope we will end up. And that is, as we've talked about, having the minimum reserve plus money to apply towards the next project, whether that be enough cash or whether it reduces the amount of the borrowing at the time.
Right, and that's our whole hope, is that 7 years from now, or whenever town council has to look at this again, that they're in the best position they can be.
Right. Thank you.
Good.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Turner?
All right. First of all, I'd like to compliment everyone on the process of how we got here. I know that some of the initial conversations regarding beach renourishment and how much to fund, we had a much higher number there that we wanted to borrow. And I think we landed at a very good place. It's the amount that we need in order to cover our costs and ensure that we have the $20 million minimum and not a lot of extra over and above that, because we will be collecting beach revenue moving forward, and fingers crossed, getting our FEMA, so it's over $7 million grant as well, so that'll give us more cushion too. One of the things that I wanted to understand is how this flows through our financial statements. And so, for example, we go in and we get the bond, the $19 million is deposited into the beach renourishment fee.
We would probably, we'd set up a separate fund, and we have used into the capital improvements fund. That's been our history, is to just have a sub-fund of the capital improvements fund and then spend it out of there on the beach renourishment project. And so you would see a receipt. It's odd governmental accounting, is that you borrow money and you show a receipt of funds, but it would be receipt of funds into the capital improvements program fund, and then it would be spent out of the capital improvements program.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what that looks like. So first of all, I'm happy to hear that it's going to be in its own separate account. Mm-hmm. So it won't be commingled with current beach revenue fees that we're collecting, so a separate account. Is that what I would call a below-the-line item, that it's going to be a fund where you're going to be transferring in
It
the
will be.
money to capital? And maybe this is a conversation to have off.
It will be a below the line item as a other funding sources is what it's called, for a above the line item expenditure. And so the expenditure is in the capital improvement plan as beach renourishment, just like the rest of our parks and roads projects. And so that spending is above that, and then it shows as a other revenue source, bonds issued.
Okay, so we'll be making transfers in as we have those expenses and such. Okay, all right.
Yes.
Thank you, that was helpful to me. In regards to the legal documents, I did have an observation. So you have the third supplemental ordinance, and it talks about authorizing these costs for acquisition and construction of new projects. I would prefer to have beach renourishment, because that's what the money is for, beach renourishment, as opposed to new projects. So is that, and so I don't know if it's something legal that we have to say, new projects, but I prefer more specificity if possible.
We have Michael Season from our friends at Burr Foreman, and he can talk a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. It's good to see you all this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to come up. The reference to new projects, it's a capitalized term within the ordinance. It's a defined term that, I don't know if you all have it in front of you. The definition of new projects means collectively any of the following projects, which is a defined term in the general bond ordinance, which may be financed in a whole or part with the new bonds, including South Beach / South Island, Central Island, The Heel, Fish Hole Creek, and Pine Island, and such other projects as may be approved by the town manager and permitted by the beach preservation fee ordinance. So the universe of projects for which these bonds can be spent are those identified beach renourishment projects, or other projects which under the general bond ordinance means other beach renourishment projects themselves. We can certainly change the nomenclature. We have historically used new projects as a defined term just because it's to repeat that concept throughout this ordinance and to tie it back to the general bond ordinance.
Right. And then,
But it can only be spent on beach renourishment projects, just to be clear.
so what you're saying is it says new projects here, but somewhere else in the document, it defines new projects as the beach renourishment.
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, well, that answers my question
Okay.
on that. And then on section 3, there's an addition to add mayor pro tem. And I just was wondering what that was associated with. Because what I found,
I'm sorry, it's section 3?
section 3, yes. As I went through this document, it talked about changes, but you couldn't see the source document to see what it was associated with. So I just curious.
Do you mean, is it section 15 deals with modifications to the general bond ordinance?
Of course, now I can't find it. Oh, here we go. Okay, it's on page 14.
Yes, section
Yes.
15?
Yeah, number 3. Of the bond, and it says, section 4.1 of the general bond ordinance shall be amended by replacing mayor of town with mayor of town, or in his absence, the mayor pro tem. I was just interested to know what that was associated with.
Sure. So generally speaking, this section concerns, you noted earlier that this is a third supplemental ordinance. It supplements an ordinance that we call it a general bond ordinance. It was approved in 2011. That ordinance relates to all issues of beach preservation fee bonds from time to time. So there was one in 2011, one in now, of course, one in 2017. So the general bond ordinance is referred back for all bond issues, and it contains the common mechanics, how bonds are issued, what conditions have to be met, how the mechanics are of collecting beach preservation fees and then applying it for the debt service for the bonds, any sort of general covenants that act for the benefit of the bondholders. This section, the section 15, is, as it is titled Modifications of the General Bond Ordinance, these particular sections are intended to update revise certain sections within the general bond ordinance, generally for the purpose of modernization. The original general bond ordinance was enacted in 2011. You know, as the past 15 years have shown, the best practices used in the industry, some comments that we've gotten from the rating agencies, from our financial advisor, would suggest that certain updates are necessary to the general bond ordinance. This one specifically that you're talking about relates to it's a section of the general bond ordinance that dictates how bonds can be executed. It identifies particular officers of the town that can execute the bonds. Right now, it just says the mayor would execute them, which is fine. Generally speaking, we would recommend to have at least some other person so that, you know, God forbid, somebody gets hit by a bus or something, or the person is unavailable and you need to execute the bonds, there's only one person mentioned. We suggested that the mayor of the town, or in his or her absence, the mayor pro tem would identify another officer on town council that could legally be authorized to execute the bonds.
Okay, that makes sense.
I've never been accused of being brief, so.
I was just curious. That's it.
That's it? Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Alfred, anything to add?
I think he wants to be named also.
I don't sign anything these days. Two points. One of which is the possibility, if not the likelihood, that we will need more sand than is originally projected. Jeff Netzinger has mentioned this morning that the storms have already indicated that we're going to require more sand on the Port Royal side. Second, these are general obligation bonds that do not pledge the full faith and credit of the town, which means it does not have to impose taxes to pay them. At the very end, it may be section of the bond ordinance, section maybe 611 or 68. There's a reference that said town council shall pay these things. And then it says, but they're not really required to. I'm assuming that what's involved here is that, yes, these are revenue bonds. They do not pledge the full faith and credit of the town, but we sure as damn would like the town to pay this stuff. So please do, but you don't have to. Is that a fair interpretation?
As Councilman Alford mentioned, the bond ordinance legally requires the beach town to pay debt service from the beach preservation fees. They are a revenue bond. They don't count against the general credit or pledge the full faith and credit of the town. They're not payable from taxes. As he mentioned, there is a provision that says that to the extent the beach preservation fees are insufficient, that the town will at least consider paying it from other sources. The town of Hilton Head would make good on its obligations. That's the interpretation. They're not legally required to. I would note that this is a subject to annual appropriation. So if there was a situation in the future where beach preservation fees were insufficient, the then town council would be presented with the opportunity of making that decision to pay or not pay. I would be remiss if I said it's not a legal obligation, but it is what we call a moral obligation. So the town would suffer a reputational harm in the marketplace. It would be dinged by the rating agencies to the extent that its general obligation debt were rated, and it would suffer adverse consequences the next time it went to the bond market. But it is not legally obligated, that is correct.
Thank you. Good, Mr. Alfred? Good, okay, all right. Ms. Irvin, anyone signed up to speak on this particular item? Good, okay, all right, we'll bring it back to the dais. Entertain a motion, please.
I move to recommend to the full council consideration of an ordinance providing the issuance, this is the subject line, Madam Deputy Clerk. Providing the issuance and sale of Town of Hilton Head Island special obligation bonds, Princess Beach Preservation Fee Pledge, in one or more series in the principal amount not exceeding $19 million, delegating the authority to the town manager to determine certain matters with respect to the bonds, prescribing the form and details of such bonds, other matters relating thereto, and providing for severability and effective date.
I second.
Okay. Any further discussion? The only thing that I would add, Mrs. Troy, is, the packet that the full town council received, that it does include the chart that Ms. Bryson spoke of as far as the escalator that we'll see, above and beyond the policy floor of the fund balance, okay? I think
Thank
that's
you.
important. Yep,
Yes.
okay, all right. All right, ready for the question? All in favor? All right, thank you. Anyone signed up for public comment on non-agenda items? Good, all right. Find ourselves adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.